They only played 6 conference games, which meant they did not play number 4 ranked Georgia that season. And not only that, 8. This is similar to Nick Saban nowadays, where he won't play road games. He only plays neutral fields against big teams, and then he plays a lot of cream puffs. Who did they play this year? Western Carolina before the Auburn game. Uh, Alabama had a 10-game schedule, which is what everybody had back then, and they played 8 games within the state of Alabama. They played back in those days. Bryant-Denny Stadium wasn't so big; it was just Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa on campus, and they played a lot of games at Legion Field. They're bigger games with bigger capacity. So they played in Tuscaloosa. Alabama beat Clemson, which was only 6-4. Mississippi State, which was only 2-8, South Carolina, which was 1-9, and then at Legion Field in Birmingham, they played Louisiana Tech, which at the time was not a football bowl subdivision program. They were still in the lower level, and they were only 1-9. They beat Louisiana Tech, Vanderbilt 1-9, LSU 5-4-1, Auburn 4-6, and then their third stadium was down in Mobile, Alabama, Ladd Peoples Stadium.
Right.
They beat Southern Mississippi 6-4. That's a combined record of 26-53-1.
Right.
And so you just can't compare that to the success and talent level at Clemson. And then here's the bigger point of all that I made about that. Michigan State and Notre Dame. Terry Hanratty was the Notre Dame quarterback then, and then of course played for the Steelers. He was primarily Terry Bradshaw's backup. But he says if you look at those rosters, those are the 2 greatest teams to ever play each other for a national championship. And why he says that is the senior classes alone at Michigan State had 7 first-round draft picks, 4 at Michigan State, and those 4 picks are all within the top 8.
Right.
Bubba Smith went number 1, Clinton Jones, a running back, number 2, George Webster, linebacker, number 5, and Gene Washington, wide receiver, number 7. And then Notre Dame had 3 first-round picks. So just from the senior class, there were 7 first-round draft picks and 17 overall. That's nearly a whole starting lineup. 6 players have been enshrined in the College Hall of Fame. Notre Dame linebacker Jim Lynch was only a second-round draft pick, but he won the Maxwell Award, which is like the Heisman. It's for the nation's top college player. It's just not as famous. And Lynch has said he said it in my book Ray of Light about Michigan State and the game of the century. That George Webster, Michigan State's rover linebacker, was the best player in the country. He should have won the Heisman. This is coming from Jim Lynch, who won the Maxwell. And then in the Heisman voting, Notre Dame fullback Nick Eddy was 3rd. Michigan State halfback Clinton Jones was 6th. Notre Dame quarterback Terry Hanratty was 8th. So you got all those guys in the Heisman. Alabama's had 1 first-round pick, but they're big. Here's the most hilarious thing about considering. Well, actually, there's something even funnier, and I'll get to that in a second. But Alabama's big ballyhooed player, consensus All-American, was Cecil Dowdy, an offensive tackle. He was 6 foot, 204 pounds.
Wow.
How was he going to block Bubba Smith, 6'7", 285?
Right.
How was he going to block George Webster, 6'4", 225? How was he going to block Notre Dame's Alan Page? Allen was 6'4", 245. Of course, he's in both the pro and college football Hall of Fame. And then who was going to block Jim Lynch, 6'1", 235? I mean, Alabama's 1966 roster didn't even belong on the same conversation as Michigan State and Notre Dame. And then the most absurd thing about it, of that all, about Notre Dame, about Alabama, people thinking they were screwed out of a national title, is they claimed there was reverse racism because this is 1966, just 3 years after Bull Connor, the protests in the civil rights movement in Birmingham, where Bull Connor, the police chief, turned fire hoses and German Shepherd dogs on protesters, including school kids. Those scenes just horrified the American public and kind of accelerated the civil rights movement that Martin Luther King was leading. Well, how in the world does a fan base that believes in segregation think they can make a case for reverse discrimination?
Right.
It's so absurd. So, anyways, I wrote my story. It says, Dabo, you're too smart of a guy, too much of a man of the New South to compare your team and its talent to Alabama. And I said, you insulted your Clemson players. So if you want to check that out, it's on ShanahanReport.com.
Okay. Well, Tommy, let me go back to the college football playoff and tie that in with the Heisman Trophy, if I may. First of all, okay, Joe Burrow, the quarterback for LSU, was a transfer from Ohio State. So there's one connection. Number two, Justin Fields was who's a current Buckeyes quarterback, transferred from Georgia. So you have transfers at the quarterback position. Wouldn't it be interesting if Burrow were to meet Fields for a chance at the national championship? And if you want another interesting dynamic, Chase Young of Ohio State is also another Heisman Trophy candidate. So, it's some interesting ironies when you compare the Heisman.
He transferred from Alabama to Oklahoma.
Exactly.
So that's something I don't like about the Heisman. If I had a Heisman vote, I'd vote for Chase Young for that very reason.
Right.
The three quarterbacks that are finalists, along with Chase Young, Ohio State's defensive end, all left an elite school for playing time at another school. And
playing time at another elite school. I mean, we're not talking about another school, Tommy. We're talking about an elite school. But when you think about the dynamics of it, Tom, okay, Joe Burrow is excelling over at LSU. Justin Fields left Georgia to go to Ohio State, and now there's a chance that these two transfer quarterbacks could very well meet for a crack at the national title.
Yeah, Burrow could play 2 weeks in a row against a transfer quarterback because he opens up against Jalen Hurts in Oklahoma, the Alabama transfer.
Good point, but I thought that those were points that would make the college football playoff even more intriguing, especially when you look at the dynamic between Joe Burrow and Justin Fields. And I think another reason for people to root for Ed Orgeron is, how do you not root for a guy who I consider like an underdog candidate to begin with? So, but we'll see how it plays out. There's a lot of good storylines pertaining to that college football playoff.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. But yeah, it's the problem with college football is all the players are following each other to the same school, and the college football playoffs, particularly the finals rankings, are down. TV ratings are down because it's just reduced to a handful of schools. It's not a regional game anymore. It's not a national game anymore. I should say it's mostly a Southern game.
Well, I agree. No doubt about that. When you see ratings down, everybody's going to sit there and look at why they're down, and that's common across the sporting world. It really is. I think dynasties are all well and good. Well, you have to factor parity in the picture to keep more people interested.
Yeah. Okay, well, geez, we went all the way to 11 o'clock. I guess
it doesn't matter. We can go ahead. I want you to talk about Army-Navy.
Well, let's do that next week because
okay.
It's getting kind of late for me.
That's fine, Tom. We'll pick it up next week for Army-Navy. And then if you want to plug your book real quickly, let's do that.
Yeah, I do have some Army-Navy stories up. I put up one today, and I'll put up another one Friday and another one Saturday if people want to read about it. ShanahanReport.com. The Army-Navy game is the grandest rivalry in college sports. And if you don't believe it, that means you haven't been to the game. It's when you go to the game, you'll realize how big the game is. Every time I see Dick Vitale broadcasting a North Carolina Duke game saying that's the biggest rivalry in sports, I get on his Twitter page and say, Dick, obviously you haven't been to an Army-Navy game because you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, the only thing I'll say about Army-Navy, okay, I'll give you 2 words for it: bucket list.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right, well, then we'll go ahead.
Here's another example to understand how big the game is. Dick Vermeil, when he was out of coaching and doing broadcasting for CBS, he worked the games a few years, and he said it's the only game where all 22 players on the opening kickoff get knocked down.
All right, well.
That tells you about the intensity.
Well, then I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll look for your stories on the Army-Navy game next week here on the Sports Exchange Special Edition with Tom Shanahan. And if you want to go ahead and plug your book real quickly before we wrap up the program, go right ahead and do it.
Great Christmas present, Ray of Light, and Ray is spelled R-A-Y-E, for Jimmy Ray, the first black quarterback to win a national title on the 1966 team. Jimmy was from segregated Fayetteville, North Carolina. Duffy Daugherty had his Underground Railroad teams, and this is a story about how Michigan State and Duffy Daugherty led the integration of college football. And actually, that reminds me, I was really pleased. I've been in an uphill battle to try to convince people with my research, my overwhelming research, and I'll put it up against anybody, that no school and no coach did more than Michigan State and Duffy Daugherty. But unfortunately, there's a lot of folklore and legends and myths that have given Bear Bryant and the 1970 USC game too much credit. First of all, Bear Bryant hardly knew anything about black players in the South. He dragged his feet on integration until 1971, and it came out later that all these stories about Sam Cunningham and Bear Bryant were all fiction. They were made up by a USC player named John Papadakis, who was trying to sell a movie script, and Sam Cunningham played along with it for a while. Then he finally came out and admitted in 2013 it never happened. That Bear Bryant was trying to show his players this is what a football player looks like. In itself, that's kind of a racist story if you ask me. But anyways, you can find it on my website. A link to it from August Publications. You can find it on Amazon. I don't get as good of commission from Amazon or any Barnes and Noble. You can order it from them too. And I was kind of pleased. Let's see, was it Wednesday? Wednesday, ESPN came out with their top 150 coaches, and they listed Duffy Daugherty number 51, which is way too low. Heck, he's behind Lloyd Carr at Michigan, who was number 50. That's ridiculous. But anyways, what really pleased me and was really gratifying, it's the first time I can really remember a national organization like ESPN quoting from my book, saying that no coach did more than Duffy Daugherty, and it also cited statistics from my book that one of my goals was to research how many Underground Railroad players there were from the South, and Duffy Daugherty recruited 44 between 1959 and 1972, his last season. And nobody else has that research because I'm the only one who's done it, and the ESPN article cited it. So that was very gratifying for me. Maybe someday Duffy will finally get the credit he deserves.
Well, since you made a lot of predictions, you want to offer one up for Army-Navy?
Oh, I got to go with Navy. But I'll tell you this, it's going to be a close game, and it's always a close game. Last year, Army was 11-2, and Navy was 3-10 because they played 13 games. They went out to Hawaii, and it went down to the fourth quarter. Those games are almost once in a while, it's not a close game, but almost always it's just a battle to the end because you guys play so fiercely.
Okay. Well, with that said, we'll wrap up this edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Manmouth. Tonight's co-host is Tom Shanahan. And Tommy, we'll look forward to doing it next week, and you can give us some more Army-Navy stories, and we'll see what other stuff is that we can come up with as well. So, meanwhile, thanks for doing this here, and have yourself a great weekend, and we'll do it again next week. All right, Tom?
Sounds good.
All right, have a good night.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.